talk about money and the idea of wealth or material gains. I was just having a in-depth GPT chat, which is a different tangent entirely to what I wanted to speak about. I'll link it below as it is relevant because they complement each other, this talk and that discussion. Lots of information that might be useful and interesting to those who are resilient, seeking independence from the system, seeking options and opportunities, seeking to understand and comprehend what's going on in our world and what might be coming down the pipe and what has already been shown to us in the last couple of decades and what the government and the centralized authorities are capable of. So that might be of some interest to you to have a look and make of it what you will. But in this particular talk, I want to talk about money and why we want it, what we're wanting to do with it, and why it may or may not be coming to us or through our accounts, and why it might, resources might not be available to us. It's all how we frame it. This is something I've been working through recently myself and figuring out how to reconcile with the reality in which we live. Why do we want money? What do we want to do with it? Why does it come? How and to what degree does it come to us? Are we repelling it or attracting it? All these things, how the flow and how the nature of all this works. So when we're talking about money, savings, wealth, assets, financial reserves and such, the question we should likely be considering and asking, if it isn't flowing in the way that we want, why is that? Are we putting out into the field and moving towards the things we actually desire, or are we waiting for the sudden windfall or to win the lottery, what have you? Are we waiting for somebody to come and save us? Somebody that has the assets to, do we want to borrow from them? And even if we do, is it just to sustain ourselves and to just kind of scrape by for yet another month or a year? Or are we moving with that flow to build towards something, to attain some sort of momentum, right? To work toward a self-reliance and a resilience, whether material, psychological, spiritual, emotional, right? Do we actually have a use for these things? Do we actually have specific intentions and plans and priorities for these resources should they come to us? Should we be able to achieve some sort of financing arrangement, whatever sort of instrument you want to talk about? Or if we're looking for a better paying job, or if we're looking to invest in a business or to increase our income, what have you, however you want to frame this, what is it that is justifying that flow? What is it that you are putting out into the field and populating into your reality to reshape? What are you walking toward that would justify the 10,000, the 50,000, the 100,000, the million, the 10 million, the 100 million that you need for this project? Whatever it might be. It could be a creative thing such as a film, a book, a artist studio, a music studio, whatever it is, whatever's relevant to you in your life, you'll know, and you're probably already thinking about these things as I mentioned, these particular ideas and threads and the scaffolding that we're trying to build with this particular discussion. Because I think, based on my own experience and opinions and point of view, based on how I've gleaned ideas from this lifetime and how these ideas are presented and conditioned into us, we're taught a certain amount of lack and scarcity right from the get-go. At the same time, ideas are convoluted and twisted around about wealth and saving, and this idea of saving for retirement and all these other misleading and I believe parasitic ideas that destroy human ingenuity and creative potential. Because 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was a lot easier to get into some sort of a stable job or situation where you could even learn on the job a skill or a trade, what have you. Plus, you're earning a decent income and a very livable wage that within a year or two, or probably less, depending on what you were doing and how disciplined you were, you could probably buy a vehicle, you could buy a home, you could actually have some sort of savings towards something. You wouldn't have to be working like today, You can still find the odd job or trade and learn on the job, but your wages aren't going to be such that within 6 months or a year you'll be able to buy a home outright. You might have a down payment towards something that's 5, 10, 15% of something, and then have to take out a massive mortgage if you qualify for it, if you've had the job for long enough, and if you check certain boxes, right? You have to get into the debtor-creditor sort of relationship, because you're not going to be able to save enough cash that is itself being consistently devalued through the hidden taxes of inflation and essentially negative interest rates of bank accounts, because you're paying fees and you're likely going to have credit cards and other things that you're living on. You're probably not paying out these loans, lines of credits, and credit cards immediately. So all these little things are siphoning away and sucking away what you think you are saving or setting aside, or creating that sort of leverage or down payment that you will have to create even more, exponentially more debt to attain the things that you think you want to attain, such as property ownership, land ownership, or buying into a business, what have you, anything that you're trying to leverage. So the whole psychology has changed over the last couple of generations. And the idea of working hard doesn't really compute anymore in the mainstream, in the main system, because the wages haven't kept up with the cost of living in general right across Western Empire. And there's other factors that feed into it. There's been the systematic destruction of the family unit, so people are isolated and fragmented. Even in my own family, it's not a very big family, but sister has her own place, her own home, and her own family and property. Mother has her own place, pays rent. I have my own place, pay my own rent, right? So every one of these individuals, that we could say is family, is fragmented and has their own little bubble reality, their own expenses and such that they have to contend with on an individual level, because we've been trained, conditioned, and taught that this is normal. This is how it's supposed to be. Whereas when you look at more traditional cultures, such as the Amish, the Mennonites, and indigenous, it's the opposite, and it always has been, all throughout their history. And these are old ideas, simple, more minimal, again, living off the land, generally have a faith-based, spiritual foundation that they build upon. And while many of us, and I talked about this in the chat earlier in that discussion, many of us think that these societies and cultures are backward and stuck in the past and all the rest of that. But what we can be certain of is that should things come to worst in the empire, in the civilization that we live in, where we've become dependent on the financial instruments, the banks, the credit cards, the debts, the loans, and all the rest of it, the internet, the electricity, all of the infrastructure that we take for granted on a day-to-day basis, we're completely dependent on it. And should that ever fail us, or, as also mentioned in the chat, should the government decide to freeze your assets, or do the bail in, bail out, whatever language that they've put in place in recent decades because of their own stupidity, greed, and criminality, they will take it from you, the depositor, because you essentially are loaning them that money. As soon as you put it into a bank account, you're giving them that money to do with that as they please, and they owe you should you want to withdraw it. But then at any time, they can decide that you can only take a certain amount per day, or they're going to take anything over the insured amount, which in Canada is 100,000, which is today basically nothing. In the States, 250,000, right? So there's a reason they have these caps. So you never want to have all your eggs in one basket, on and on and on. Again, refer to that discussion. But the point is to be aware of how you are integrated and perhaps overly dependent on the systems that you are overly conditioned to believe in the programs and the paradigm and the technology and the progressive notions and psychology that is being offered to you, because it's all based on fiction. It's all based on lies, manufactured narratives, manufactured priorities and values. They're not your endemic, inherent, human-centric, natural, organic, autonomous and sovereign ideas. They are the opposite. They're teaching you dependence on the system. They're teaching you that it's safer and more resilient to be plugged in to these central authorities when they've shown that just the opposite is true, that at every turn they will abuse the laws and codes and mandates and corporate structures whenever they please, for whatever reasons they can make up and whatever emergencies they can create. So you need to be aware of these things, and the more dependent you are on that centralized sort of structure that has been systematically devaluing your currency, devaluing your worth and your labor in the market, consistently devaluing it for decade upon decade upon decade, that you need to look otherwise, and you need to be aware of that system that has cracked the scaffolding and the foundation that it was built upon, and that it is eventually going to destroy itself. It is eventually going to collapse because, the more complex the codes, the laws, the mandates, and the language that they use, the less it is in fact for the benefit of its citizenry and humanity at large. So to get back to the point of what I was trying to explore in this conversation, the idea of money, wealth, currency, how we're trained to collect and amass material things and to buy better things and to buy better toys, clothes, property, what have you, is in itself, psychologically debilitating. It's a trap. It's a trick, because there's no end to that. It's a self-fulfilling, self-destructive cycle that parasitizes off your ingenuity and what you're creating and what you believe is valuable to offer to the world, to the market, to your audience. And it's dependent again on certain infrastructures, whether technological or otherwise. So when you're thinking about what you truly value and prioritize, and whether or not you're ever going to have the funds, finances, and material wealth or resources to be able to attain and experience and proceed with these particular pursuits, the energy, the metaphysical nature of this thing is something that we need to take into consideration as well, because it's all about the flow, right? So if you can lay out whatever dollar amounts you think you might need to pursue certain things in this life. Number one, is that what you truly desire? Is that what you truly want and need? Or is that somebody else's idea, something handed down from parents, who lived in a certain way in their generation and who generally want better for you than they had, so they were sold certain ideas and narratives and paradigms that they pushed into your consciousness, into your awareness, that you should value, prioritize, because they'll say, I came from this background, that background. When I was young, we struggled to blah, 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 right? So there's a certain framework and architecture that you're already inculcated with throughout your life from your youth, your childhood, right? And these things shape your philosophy and psychology throughout a lifetime. And if you don't become conscious and aware of them, it will define all of your actions, behavior, beliefs for the rest of your time here. And it can, of course, work against you, because you won't understand why you have this fatigue, stress, anxiety, worry, paranoia, why you're leaning into the ideas of scarcity and lack all the time, why you're leaning into this not enough sort of paradigm, regardless of what you achieve in this life, regardless of what you might gain, regardless of how many dollars you might put in the bank, right? You're working against yourself on an unconscious level, and you don't even know why. So that is perhaps one of the first things you want to really address. The why. There's many hows, many different ways that you can find to supplement, to increase, to adjust that flow. And also, we can limit ourselves to the extreme because we only see that there are certain ways to solve these problems, right? Oh, we just need to work harder and then we'll get more money. Or we just need to train in this particular skill and then we'll be able to get the job to get the money. We can get into a relationship or a marriage to stabilize ourselves, and then there's a partnership, and then that will allow me to get more money or sustained wealth. Or in the greater perspective, it allows you to work in tandem with someone to prioritize and clarify what it is you truly want and desire in this life, whether it's children, relationship, marriage, a home, homestead, farm, or to simply be nomadic, whatever you want to try and experiment with, whatever you actually truly value and want to experience in this life. And what, again, you prioritize today might not be the same tomorrow or next year, and things can change very quickly. Much of that can be well out of our control as well, because the system at large needs to keep coming up with ways to keep parasitizing and predating on humanity and the civilization, again, because it's getting bigger and bigger. More laws, statutes, and centralized authorities and ideas will require more narratives, more fiction, more manufactured emergencies, fake crises and the like, more, world events, more wars, whatever it is. They have to keep creating and manufacturing these things to sustain the machine as it is, because the cracks are there. The instabilities are there. And we can see them. Everywhere you look. Anybody that you see speaking, from a pulpit with their little slogans, whether it's red or blue or whatever team or political side you want to talk about, they're spewing absolute nonsense to maintain certain narratives, to maintain certain psychological and narrative structures in a society, and to keep you believing certain things that are important and real, and to keep you believing in the idea of democracy or the republic or centralized authority, what have you, right? It keeps you bought in to the system. It keeps you buying into the idea of voting into that system that has been literally feeding off of you and is literally destroying itself from the inside out. These systems, these cycles happen all throughout history, and we're in the end stages of certain cycles right now, so you need to be aware of these things. What do you truly want and desire? What is wealth? What is it that you mean to gain from these material gains and such? What do you actually want to achieve in this life? So if the resources aren't becoming available, if you hate your job and the fact that you have to do it because of other responsibilities, because of taking care of basic needs of survival and taking care of your home and essentials, there's something likely that's a little off kilter in the formula, right? There's something that might just be missing from your psychology, your paradigm, your belief system, and your perspective. You are perceiving things in a certain way and experiencing life in a certain way, and you go through the daily routines for the most part unconsciously. And if it's difficult, and if it's causing you anguish, anxiety, fear, frustration, and constant fatigue, if it's costing you health and unrest, if it's affecting you and causing you sort of physical ailments and the like, there are reasons for all of these things, and they don't happen overnight. Many of the things that plague us and cause us these levels of stress and consternation and confusion and frustration are years, possibly decades in the making, right? So to alleviate that, there's no quick fix. If you think right now that you're going to suddenly shift whatever it might be to a new diet, or adding a supplement, or moving to a new location again and again and again is going to remedy these situations. If you think going to another relationship or dating 100 different people is going to help you find that one true thing, that one true connection, I think you're missing the point entirely, right? There's something fundamental missing from that perspective, from your psychology, from your perception, that you're not looking at or not willing to look at or terrified to admit about yourself. And that's probably a good place to start. If the flow isn't happening, if the resources aren't coming, you can blame the world, you can blame the politicians, you can blame the collapse of civilization. There's plenty of things you can blame. You can, blame the internet for going down 30 seconds and traumatizing you because suddenly you don't have access to nonsense and fake news and fake world events. You can blame whatever, the noisy dog next door for wrecking your sleep last night. You can blame billions of things outside of you and defer and delay, and forever put off the need to address what's going on inside you, the psychological, emotional, spiritual barriers that you've put on yourself. To get the resources, to get the relationships and connections and things happening, to open the doors to these possibilities, could it be that you need to get a little more clear about your why, your true desires, your true aims, your true goals? Whatever it might be, whatever scale you're looking at, the number doesn't matter. That's going to be relevant to you and to your subjective reality, right? What's $10,000 to someone is the equivalent of 100 million to another. It's all perspective. It's all based on, priorities and how you live and how you've maintained and and explore it and experience this life in those material ways, right? It's going to differ from one person to the next, even from one family member to the next. It'll be completely different. So give yourself the time and the space to sit with yourself and your understandings and your perspective, perceptions, to really get a grasp on your values and priorities, to really get clear on what it is you truly want, and to start focusing your energy and putting those ideas into the field and getting specific about what you would even do with that flow, what you would even do if you suddenly won the lottery. What if, this goes beyond money, of course, but whatever it is that you want to achieve, if you're waiting for perfect conditions and circumstances, those will never happen because you won't recognize them in the moment when they arrive. You're not prepared. And when it does show up, you will overspend. You'll blow it on bullshit that you don't need. Whatever it is, you're going to take advantage of it in ways that are wasteful and impatient and ignorant to your true wants, needs, and desires, right? If you're not prepared for whatever eventuality that might allow you to finally, have some sort of leverage and resources to pursue that thing that you say you've always wanted, it's never going to come because you're essentially repelling it. You're keeping it away from yourself. You're closing the doors. You're saying no to all sorts of things because your field of vision has become so narrow that you've put blinders on, which can help for some people and it can be useful, certainly. But I think you understand my point. If there's this repulsive sort of energy, how is that wealth? How are the resources? How is the cash, the flow, the whatever it might be, the resources, material or otherwise that you need? How are they going to come into your field of view, into your reality, into your life, unless you have some way to continue that flow, some way to recycle it into the system that will benefit you and everyone else involved, right? So get clear on those priorities, get clear on the specific things you're aiming to achieve and start walking in that direction. Start moving your avatar toward that thing and just pay attention, right? Because some elements will show. And again, I was speaking to this in the previous video. They'll show up to you at the level that you're at. They will meet you where you're at. And hopefully they will push you towards where you want to go. They will challenge you in ways that are meant to help propel you toward what is it that you are pursuing, right? That's hopeful. That's, if we're putting that out into the field, that idea that we want to progress, we want to improve, we want to evolve, we want to unveil these things for ourselves, the process, the procedures, whatever it is, we want to clarify and understand and know when these opportunities come toward us, and when they show themselves, we'll recognize them for what they are. And I think that only happens when we're in motion. Keep walking kind of thing. So get clear on these things. And it's very likely that the resources, the surprise windfalls, the opportunities, the people, right? All of these things will unfold, and perhaps even very quickly, if not the same day, the same week, the same month. Suddenly these surprise things will show up to enable a step towards something, enable you to keep tweaking that psychology and reframing something that's been stuck in a certain, mindset for years or decades, right? It will empower you to go beyond what you have been to this point, because you're probably waiting, again, for some sort of circumstance to be perfect. You're waiting for perfect home that you can finally settle in and get to work. You're waiting for the, perfect blue sky to finally go out for a hike. You're waiting for whatever it is to finally dive into that thing that you've been putting off and putting off. But what is it that you've been practicing the most? Waiting, deferring, putting off, delaying, making excuses. Your body is used to that. You're wired that way, right? How do you think you're ever going to change that unless you start actually changing that? Start rewiring your neurology and your nervous system to behave in a slightly different way, even though the results aren't necessarily showing, even though the resources aren't there yet. If you're stuck in a pattern of waiting, deferring, delaying, blaming, that's what your body knows. That's what your psychology knows. That's what your spiritual energy field knows, and will keep reaffirming that. Doesn't matter how much you affirm or pray or wish, nothing will change unless you change. Have a good one.
It's been coming down every other day, but they tell me We are in drought season, that's not my story, not my reality. No matter what you force my eyes to see. And the sky is falling right